Talk over drink.
Talks over drinks. Good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Talks Over Drinks. My name is Corey Fauconier, and as always, my partner in justice, the guy Markel Prines. Markel, how are you this evening, sir?
I'm doing awesome as usually, brother. I'm excited. Always got to keep the excitement going. Glad to have our guest that we have on tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing the information that he has to share. So I'm ready.
I got you. Food for action this evening, sir.
All right. So this evening's food for action is pretty simple. Cast a wide enough net of skills so you never have to hit the ground hard.
Mm. All right, all right. That's wonderful. Appreciate that. Good to see you as always. And my everyone favorite Nazarene attorney, Sandy Sanders. Sandy, how are you this evening, sir?
They're doing well. Thank Jesus, we're doing well.
Amen. 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 How was your day?
It was pretty good. It's a little bit hectic. We're trying to buy a car.
Ah,
And I'm trying to buy it from the sales division of a rental place, and I'm not going to mention who they are, but let's just say the service was not great, and we're going to move on to somebody else.
I
And what I
understand.
probably should have done is pick the underdog to start with. I'll put it that way.
Well, I'll tell you, I have I'm gonna have to do a review. We looked on Google. We're in Yorkville, Illinois for some training. And Mandy looked on Google and found this like little local pizza shop. And I went to the pizza shop because I couldn't order online, and I got there and the owner was there, and I started talking to him, and I was like, well, what's the wait? And he was like 30 minutes. And I was like, okay. And I sat down, and he was surprised that I didn't walk out. But I had this whole conversation with the gentleman. He's a retired Marine, and he started, the name of the pizza spot is Planet Pizza in Plano, Illinois. And he just talked about the problems he was having as an entrepreneur with those app-based delivery services. So I definitely said I would have to write him a good review, number one, and we would have to invite him on Talks Over Drinks because the pizza was great, the salad was great, the wings were great, and you just had to wait. And he just talked about how people complain so much because they didn't want to wait, but the food was outstanding. And you got to give your money to the little guy. I didn't want to give it to Domino's or any of those other establishments because it just would have been so. So definitely have to shout out Steve at Planet Pizza in Plano, Illinois, and we'll have to have him on. My libertarian brother, Joshua Huffman. Josh, how are you this evening, sir?
I'm doing all right. Glad to be with you. Sorry I wasn't feeling so well last week, but doing better now.
Good.
And as I posted on Facebook, my visa has been approved.
Amen.
So, yay. I expect in a little over a month I'll be on the other side of the world.
All right. Well, we definitely, always praying for you. And I know that is going to be a positive, not only for yourself, but I know that you're going to bring everything you learn about political parties and the system in New Zealand back to us here in America. And hopefully we'll be able to make a larger dent in the policy aspect of the Libertarian Party. So I'm always excited to hear, about what you're going to do with your education. Well, folks, today or this evening, we are welcoming our libertarian brother, Dan Fishman. Very lengthy bio, but I will tell you that he has been a notable figure in libertarian politics, and he is also a pioneering tech innovator, which I know will spark Markel's interest. He was the executive director of the Libertarian Party between 2019 and 2021. He served as senior staff on the Johnson Well Libertarian presidential campaign in 2016, has a long list of accomplishments in liberty. From 21 to 22, he was the executive director of People for Liberty, which is a 501c4 organization that was dedicated to promoting libertarian values. Currently, he is the leader of Let Live, which he's the executive director, and he is focused on advancing libertarian principles through active engagement and education. I would like to stop and welcome Dan Fishman. Dan, welcome to Talks Over Drinks, sir.
Corey, it's such a pleasure to be here. I've been hoping for a while to get on the show. And when you guys used to do it in person, I'm like, I can make that drive. I'm in Maryland. I'm not that far away. But virtual is probably even better. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we love to have you. You know, we had to get used to the virtual, but like Markel said, we're able to connect with people that are a lot further away from us in Virginia,
Yep.
and we're very thankful and blessed that you're here. So I know that you and I originally met in person back in Orlando at the
Yep.
Libertarian National Convention, the same day as Comic-Con in Orlando in 2016. I was looking through some old pictures, so I know I met Gary Johnson, and I met a whole bunch of people that we may connect with on Facebook. But can you tell our viewers what originally attracted you to the Libertarian Party?
The best thing I can say that attracted me to the Libertarian Party was when I was a kid and my parents would tell me what to do. And I'm like, why? Why? I mean, I want to do what I want to do. And the thing is, as a kid, you don't really know anything. But even then, I wanted to be free.
Right.
I was lucky enough to grow up. Great parents gave me books early on. My mother was a librarian. One of the first books I can remember reading was Biography of Thomas Jefferson. Now,
Wow.
I don't want to say how old I am, but my childhood was in the early 70s. And, biography about Jefferson then might not have included all the details that we would include in Jefferson biography now. But it still talked about the fact that this was a guy who understood that the most important thing was to be free. And if you think about what the world was before the American Revolution, 99% of the people in the world lived under the rule of a king or an emperor or some tyrannical system.
Right.
Now, 90% of the world lives in a place that at least claims to have elections. I'm going to say claims because, Iran says they have elections. Russia says they have elections. But this idea of a government of the people, by the people, for the people, as soon as I understood that, and I, at least read, Jefferson's mighty words that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed, man, I'm like, absolutely. That's the way it's supposed to work, is that everybody consents to the idea that we're going to work together and we're going to have a government. And, my brand of libertarianism, I am not an anarchist. I'm a minarchist. I think that there are some spaces where, like a justice system, distribution of scant resources, I think we're always going to have a very small form of government.
Right.
To make it as small as we possibly can. But one of the big crises that's coming for the planet is fresh water. There's not enough fresh water to go around as we get bigger, as we grow more food, stuff like that. How do we resolve who gets to use the water in the ground? Should it go to the richest people who are able to build these giant wells and drill it out? Or does everybody have it? That's the sort of libertarian that I am. I'm a minarchist. So
Wow.
that's what brought me in as a kid. And then growing up, I felt like I was a Republican, mainly because my parents were both academics. They were hardcore Democrats. And just to be rebellious, I said, well, I'm a Republican because that's going to irritate my parents.
Right.
Reagan was the first president that I really got excited about. And I was very excited about Reagan up until Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson made it pretty clear the Republican Party wasn't for me. They didn't want people that were like me in their Republican Party, moral majority. I didn't fit that bill.
Right.
So then I found libertarianism, where it didn't really matter what was what I was doing, as long as I wanted everybody else to be as free as me. And that's when it took. And I started to get active in the party around 2008. I had the benefit. I grew up in Galveston, Texas. So Ron Paul was actually my congressman when I grew up.
Good for
Wow.
you. Yeah.
Okay.
Without even knowing what a libertarian was, I would hear Ron Paul and go to things as a child and say, wow, that guy's amazing. Everything that he talks about makes complete sense. Why is he only a congressman? Why isn't he president? And, I talked about Reagan being a guy that was, the first president I really liked a lot, Reagan came out and campaigned for Ron Paul in 1976. I remember going to that rally. I'm like, that's amazing. People, again, only old people like me remember this, but 76, the Republicans had a floor fight at the convention between Reagan and Gerald Ford. And Ford won, but that was setting Reagan up at the beginning. And if he went around the country, he came out to see Ron Paul. And I'm dating myself here. I'm 9 years old, but I was a precocious child. And going to that thing and hearing that talk, that's sort of what brought me to the liberty movement. And then what brought me back, right? What changed me from being a guy, I'm much more famous as a software person than I am as a libertarian. What brought me back to being very active in the Libertarian Party? 2012, Barack Obama signs the National Defense Authorization Act that suspends habeas corpus for a while. Right? The idea that if they have a suspicion, if they suspect you of terrorism, the government can pick you up without a warrant, hold you without the right to an attorney, and without the right to a speedy trial. It sort of suspended all that stuff because we were so crazy in the war on terror at that point in time. That spoke to my family's personal history. My grandmother came over from Russia in 1908. And she came over because she was one of 9 daughters. She and her sisters and her mother had gone to the market. They came home and her father was gone.
Wow.
And they asked the neighbors, they're like, what happened? They're like, well, the police took him. They went down to the police station. The police like, we don't know where he is. The police just disappeared him. And it's unclear why, but probably because he was Jewish. It wasn't a good, safe place to be a Jewish person at that point in time, but who knows? And so my great grandmother said, we can't stay here. It's not safe. Let's go to the country where it's going to be safest for us. And so they came to the United States because the police were able to just make somebody disappear.
Right.
And when Obama proposed this idea of suspending habeas corpus, I'm like, I got to get in. I've been on the sidelines, but this is about my family's personal history, our relationship between the police and the people and the government. So let me get up there and let me start speaking about it. So I ran for Congress in 2012. I was lucky enough to it was the most expensive race in the country at the time. And shocker, I didn't win. But I was in Massachusetts at the time. And Massachusetts politics are different than anywhere else.
Right.
So the Republican I was running against was a married gay man who was pro-choice. That was the Republican. The Democrat was actually pro-life because he was a Catholic. And his wife had just gone to jail for money laundering, the badge of honor. So it was a really close race. And they fought against each other so much that I got invited to the first debate because people wanted there to be, they're like, we need to have some, sort of a moderating influence. And the bar was not very high, but everybody came out and said, wow, Fishman won the debate. He was the best guy there. And then I got invited to every debate, which was nice.
That's good for you.
It was, it was lucky. The bar's not that high, right? If you're a principled libertarian, you have been thinking about your principles for a long time, and you've been defending them in conversations. You know how like sometimes the plural noun for cows is a herd, and the plural noun for birds is a flock. People say the plural noun for libertarians is an argument. It's an argument of libertarians. But that's what we do, right? We get together and we argue our points and we argue the finest details. So when I got up there to talk with Richard Tassay, was the Republican, John Tierney was Democrat, and we started talking about the issues, I was much more experienced than these guys in making my point. And libertarian values, if you've worked on them, it rings a bell in the back of everybody's mind. They're like, well, of course that's what I want. Of course I want the most freedom possible in my life. Of course I want to be respectful to other people. And Republican and Democratic politics aren't like that.
Wow.
So that's when I got back. I did well in the election, well enough that Bill Weld wrote me a handwritten note saying, Dan, you were the best candidate running. If I could have voted for you, I would have, which was nice. I mean, who writes a handwritten note anymore?
Right.
But I wrote him back, and we started a correspondence. And then in 2016, when he became the vice presidential nominee, he didn't know many libertarians. He said, Dan, I want you to be my guy in the campaign. And I'm like, you were talking to the wrong person. You know, I ran in one election. I'm a software guy. He's like, you know your people. You know the libertarians. He's like, and you can translate for me. Make a long story short, I did eventually take that. It was an incredible learning experience to see, Bill Weld is not everybody's idea of a perfect libertarian.
And I will say this one thing to you. So I was there in the press pit.
Yep.
When Governor Weld was, I guess, selected, and I could tell the temperature in the room just because it just seemed like the party was so disappointed that he was selected. So I guess my question to you, since you knew him on a personal level, being is that you cultivated that type of personal relationship with him, what would you have said to everybody in the room in Orlando and throughout TV land that was very disappointed that he was the vice presidential pick for that year?
I think a lot of the reason why people were disappointed is that a lot of libertarian politics, people are excited about being big fish in a small pond, right? There's a lot of libertarians who feel like they're important because they're important libertarians. But for us being honest about the success of our movement, the success of our party, important libertarian is like saying, yeah, I'm the fastest runner in my little town. It doesn't mean that you're an Olympic level athlete. It just means that in this little race, you might have a chance of winning.
Right.
And so when Bill Weld came in, and I'll push back a little bit against the idea that everybody was disappointed. He got the nomination with 51% of the vote. It was close. Could have been Larry Sharp, who's a good friend of mine. I love Larry, and he got it because Gary asked for it. But then once he was in, he and Gary taught the Libertarian Party how a real election is run. So first of all, fundraising. That guy was an unbelievable fundraiser. So for 41 straight days, he was on the phone and raised over $100,000 each day. So in 1 month, he essentially raised $4.1 million. The campaign ended up raising over $12 million. But that initial push, when he first got onto the ticket, that enabled everything else to happen. They say it takes money to make money.
Amen.
That's 100% true in politics.
Amen.
And we like to say early money counts twice.
Wow.
Bringing in that $4 million in June, that set the stage for everything else. And you remember that part of the campaign took off. We were hot. They were getting to a point where it looked like Gary and Bill were actually going to be included on the stage in the debates, which freaked the Republicans out and freaked the Democrats out a little bit because both sides thought Gary Johnson's going to take votes away from our guy and we're going to lose. And we crested as high as 13%. You needed to get to 15% to get in the debate. But let's do a quick little history of what happened. It used to be that the League of Women Voters ran the debates and they invited whoever they wanted to. And then in 1988, League of Women Voters asked questions that George Bush and Dukakis didn't like. And so they said, okay, we're not going to have League of Women Voters write the questions anymore. We're going to write the questions, but League of Women Voters, if you want to host the debate, that's great. League of Women Voters like, we're not going to host a BS debate where somebody else writes the questions. And they said, okay, well, the Commission on Presidential Debates then is going to be formed and it's going to have Republicans and Democrats on it. And they say it's nonpartisan, but it's not nonpartisan. It's bipartisan.
Right.
It's Republicans and Democrats. So then in 92, Ross Perot, they said, okay, anybody who's polling more than 5% can get into the debate. 92, Ross Perot's at 7%. He gets into the debate. He crushes in the presidential debate. He had that little folksy thing. You got a truck and it's on the side of the road. You got to get the truck out of the ditch. Get it on the road. He was good, entertaining. Ends up at 19%. George Bush loses because Ross Perot's in that race. But the Republicans and Democrats don't like that anybody did that well. So they changed the percentage from 5% to 15%. In the history of modern polling, no Republicans and Democrats combined have never polled below 80%. So that means that in order for a libertarian to get in debate, you have to get 15% of the remaining 20%, which is almost impossible. And the question that they ask is, if the election were today, who would you vote for? And so everybody who says, I don't know because I haven't seen a debate, counts against Gary Johnson getting into the debate.
Right.
So here we are at 14%, and it starts to get worried. And a billionaire in California spent $65 million to run an ad campaign just against Gary Johnson. Not in favor of anybody else, but they show some of the unfortunate clips about how Gary looks a little goofy sometimes. They talk about, Gary takes marijuana. He's a CEO of a cannabis company. Essentially slam him and knock the numbers back down. But in all of that, with the money that they raised, Gary and Bill said, it can't stop here. Let's make a better Libertarian Party. So they took a lot of the money that they raised and they paid for 5,000 training classes at the Leadership Institute for members of the Libertarian Party. Total cost. I mean, those are normally, 100.
Are you talking about the Leadership Institute that Morton Blackwell runs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've been good. They've been bad. I will say that their basic fundraising classes are things that people who want to run a party and want to run a campaign, their politics 101 classes, those things are pretty good. They'll claim that they are a libertarian institute. I would argue that they're more conservative Republican, but the basic classes are pretty good. And we have an interesting, history with them. The woman who was executive director before me, Lauren Doherty, was, senior staff at the Leadership Institute. They're conservative based, but in terms of teaching people how to be effective at politics, they're pretty good. Anyway, so
I think the fact that Blackwell would even let you do that speaks well for him.
Yeah. I mean,
libertarians sometimes get into this criticism of you hurt my guy, and Warnock
100%.
won because of the Libertarian blah blah who happened to be Chase Oliver, but that kind of thing. And I don't agree with that, but I hear that.
Well, I would argue that there's a very good argument to be made that everything that's happened to the Libertarian Party happened because in 2020, Joe Jorgensen covered the spread in 6 of the 7 swing states. And somebody said, look, if Trump wants to win in 2024, he should make sure that there's not a Libertarian candidate running, or there's not a strong Libertarian candidate running. And the way you do that is you sabotage the party. And, none of this part is particularly hidden. Patrick Byrne, who's the CEO and founder of Overstock.com, is the largest single donor to the Mises Caucus. He also was in the Oval Office on January 6th. So he's a confidant of Donald Trump's and gave a tremendous amount of money to the Mises Caucus.
What's his name?
Patrick Byrne, Byrne.
Okay,
And,
I'm gonna. So I'm gonna have a question. I definitely. I'm gonna let Josh go first because I'm sure Josh has a question for you.
Oh, gee. I must say I've just been enjoying listening. I haven't actually come up with a question per se.
You Sandy, you have a question for Dan?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think I said something on this podcast some time ago, and I'm going to say it again, but I'm going to try to shorten it to about 30 seconds.
All right.
I would like to see, and I'm not a member of any party technically, but I've been thinking about joining the Libertarian Party for some time, and almost would like to join and run for something, but my wife is not as crazy about that kind of outgoingness as I am. I'm very outgoing.
I got a story like that too.
Yes, a lot of people married for love and for beauty and for sexiness and for cooking and not for politics. But here's the 30-second version of it. I would like to see the Libertarian Party run a candidate for president that would articulate the ideals of the Declaration of Independence.
Yep.
That we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that can't be taken away.
Yep.
And then I would like that person to also say the genius of the Constitution is, and we know we don't follow Constitution, so don't go by today. Go by the genius of the Constitution is imperfect. We had slavery and all that. Forget that. The Constitution gave us the structure to stop slavery down the road.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The government, the federalism, executive has too much power. Wickard v. Filburn should be overruled. And you kind of use the campaign as a little bit of a civics lesson as to what the Libertarian Republic should be. Please don't talk about abolishing Social Security. Please don't talk about open borders. Now, you can say, a libertarian can say, open borders is great in theory because you should be able to take you, your family, all of your money. You shouldn't have to fill out a form for it, and you should be able to cross any border you want. But we know that's not where we're at now.
Right.
Yeah.
And what it does is millions of people, Chase Oliver talked about open borders, and then he talked about something else. He talked about drag queens. And I'm telling you, no Trump voter voted for him. So if Trump set it up so Oliver would win, he succeeded brilliantly. But I want a positive campaign, something that says this is what liberty ought to be, and we're going to try to get it. And so if you'll forgive me for sounding frustrated a little bit, but because
I agree with you. One of the things I talk about, so when I was executive director, we made an emphasis on Constitution Day to go out and talk about the Constitution. And, for me, one of the geniuses of the Constitution is that the Constitution does not give you any rights. Your rights don't come from government. As it says in the Declaration of Independence, your rights are inalienable. The Constitution is an admonition to government. Do not interfere with these rights. First Amendment, Congress shall make no laws. Second Amendment, Congress shall not infringe. Fourth Amendment, right? The people have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. The Constitution is a whole list of saying
right to jury trial and all of that stuff.
Exactly. The Constitution says the government cannot do these things.
Right.
And then, it sort of caps it up. I recognize I'm preaching to the choir here. In the 10th Amendment, it says, all the powers that are not here are given to the states or the people.
And the localities and the people. That's exactly right.
Exactly.
And so many people don't realize that. Now, I cheer for certain things that certain people do that I know are not constitutional, but I cheer for them because it's the result I want.
Right.
But I just feel like we're getting to that age in the Roman Republic just before Caesar and all of them came along and destroyed the Republic once and for all. And I think we got like one or two last chances to try to do something about it. And, the other plan is I like the fact that I appreciate your story about Weld, because I didn't like Weld because Weld stood up and said, vote for Clinton if you can't vote for us. But
hang on. That is 100% not what he said, Sandy. So let me tell I'm going to give you some deep tea on this. So what happened was,
I'm ready to be corrected.
All right. So what happened was Utah being the people who were running the Johnson campaign, issued a press release that said, we believe that what Hillary Clinton did with her emails is illegal and she should be prosecuted. And they signed Gary and Bill's name to it. Bill said, I am a practicing attorney. You cannot sign my name to a legal opinion without my consent. And
that's true.
Yeah, he's like, you guys need to retract that. And they're like, we're not going to retract it. You know, we've already put it out there. We're at the end of the campaign. So then he went on Matt out, and he didn't say vote for her. What he said is, I'm here to vouch for her. She is not a criminal. Now, I didn't like that.
I disagree. I think she's a crook. I think she was a crook. I think she did the same thing Bob McDonnell did, although Bob McDonnell was technically not a crook because all he did was introduce people and be stupid. But Hillary Clinton used her position, and the emails was designed to cover that up. That's what I believe. Now, we can always disagree, and we're going to disagree agreeably about it. But I don't think there's any question, because what happened to the Clinton Foundation when Trump won? It died. Why did it die? Because there's no more access. So there's no more to sell. There's no more for Clinton to sell.
One of my favorite jokes was that when people were saying that the Russians interfered with the elections, Putin said, if I'd wanted to influence American government, I would have just made a donation to the Clinton Foundation.
That's better. That's excellent.
Yeah,
that is excellent. That is excellent.
I mean, there's no question about that. I'm not a huge Hillary fan.
No,
I mean, I'm not even a small.
And I may have
Hillary
oversimplified what he said, but that was kind of how a lot of people took it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That is how people took it. He was very careful. He parsed his words like a lawyer at that point in time.
Yep.
Because
I'm a lawyer too.
Right. It was a legal thing. And so he was being very careful about what was being said, because, wasn't just a lawyer, and he still actually is a practicing lawyer, but he was U.S. attorney. He is, everybody probably has seen the movie The Departed, the takedown of the Irish mob in Boston. Mm-hmm. That was Bill Weld. He was the U.S. attorney that put that case together.
And he took a chance on all of that to be killed for reprisals and stuff.
He was a law and order guy.
Yes.
And if you get elected as a Republican in a state that is 80% Democrat, and then in the second time he got reelected, he had 77% of the vote. He was a small government guy. Now, as he said, I've been hanging out with Republicans for a long time. And when he ran in 2016, he said some things about guns that just weren't true, that were wrong. And we tried to train him up on it. He did, however, unlike a lot of presidential candidates, his brother owned the best duck hunting company in New Hampshire, David Clinton's Duck Hunt. And if you want to go up there and have a great time in New Hampshire is a great state for hunting. David Weld. You knew David Weld really well. And we wanted to actually run a campaign with Bill at a turkey shoot, because that man, he could bring down some clay pigeons with a shotgun. And I'm like, that's a great thing for a libertarian to show, because, Lord knows, neither of the other candidates in 2016.
It beats Dukakis driving a tank, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's not like either of the other. It's not like, I have no idea what Donald Trump's relationship is with the actual Second Amendment. He doesn't strike me as a guy who really knows his way around a gun. No. And for sure, Hillary Clinton doesn't know anything about guns.
Right.
It would be, I thought that would have been a great thing. Utah shot it down because they're like, we don't want it to be Bill doing that. And Gary's not a big gun guy. Gary's not anti-guns, but he doesn't. Gary would have a hard time telling you the difference between the magazine and the clip. So, and that's just the nature of the beast. But over the course of a year, however, Bill was going to run in 2020. He was going to be the Libertarian presidential candidate. I'm spilling all the tea here. You guys are bringing it out.
Listen, let me tell you something. As you're continuing, you are putting I guess, sorely needed information for me as a libertarian on the table. And, I'm going to ask you some questions with regards to the Mises Caucus, because I don't know any Mises Caucus people. I've called and spoken to all of what in hip hop we call them the OGs, the original gangster libertarians. I've spoken to a lot of those folks, and unfortunately, there is a rift in the party.
Yep.
And I don't know how it happened. I know I found out about the party breaking up by reading one of the Richmond newspapers. Somebody that wrote a bad article about me when I was running for state senate in 2017 wrote an article, and they were like, we got a press release and the Libertarian Party has disbanded. And I called a guy. I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, the party's been disbanded. And I'm like, well, who did you talk to? And then I started calling people, and I'm like, what? I was over the road. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I think my issue is that I know people on both sides. I know people that stayed with the Libertarian Party of Virginia, and I will tell a story about how Josh pulled me back in. I know people that went and started the Classical Liberal Party and they left. And then there's some people like me that just kind of are politically homeless. My dues to the Libertarian Party of Virginia had lapsed. I paid my dues only because Josh called me when he was running for state senate. And I was sitting on a washing machine at a Travel Centers of America truck stop in Denver, Colorado. And I was sitting there looking at my phone, and I saw the chat bubbles. And it was like Josh Huffman. And I was like, okay. And Josh was like, Corey, you have 3 Facebook profiles. And I just happened to find this new one. And Josh started saying, hey, I was running for office. And I came into the Libertarian Party, and I learned public relations and media relations from Toastmasters International, which was a nonprofit speaking and networking group. That's how I met Sandy. And I brought my superpowers with me to the Libertarian Party. Nobody paid for me to go to class and learn any of this stuff. I learned it, and I came to the party because I believed in the party.
Yeah.
I personally think that state party leadership at the time, they knew the Mises Caucus was coming. We tried to change our bylaws. The bylaws didn't get changed. So as far as I'm concerned, from what I know, the party could have done something to at least slow down this changeover to the Mises Caucus. Now, I don't know anybody in the Mises Caucus. Some people have given me names. I've reached out to the people that still run the LPVA. I don't have any problems with them because they haven't done anything to me personally. But I personally think that unless the Libertarian Party of Virginia makes amends with the people that are upset or pissed off or disgruntled with the Classical Liberal Party, I don't know how liberty is going to be in Virginia. That's my personal opinion.
As a neighbor to Virginia, I'm in Southern Maryland. There's a Mount Rushmore of Virginia libertarians, right? It's Jim Lark, Bill Redpath, Mark Montoni, and Steve Dotsbach. Those guys are just, they were legends in the party for 40 years. Only Jim Lark still lives in Virginia, Dr. Lark. But what happened in the party and what happened with the Mises takeover was 2 things. First, we are a small party, okay? And because we are a small party, we are vulnerable to big party actions. And so, since I'm spilling all the tea, I can tell you that in 2020, if Bill Weld was going to be the Libertarian nominee, we had a plan to do what Mises did. We were going to AstroTurf the state conventions. If I wanted to spend, Josh, you guys in Virginia, if I wanted to spend $20,000, could I take over the Virginia State Convention? Could I pay people $100 to go and show up and vote the way I wanted to? Absolutely, sure. I could. And that happened. Okay. I mean, New Hampshire, being the best example, right? And I think everybody can agree the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, which is, the core of the Mises, those guys are terrible, right? I mean, they have put out just the worst tweets. One of them was, if you abolished immigrants and you killed every trans person in America, the country would be more free.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you abolished the income tax and killed every trans person, the country would be better off. He said, we're libertarians. Said libertarians believe in reparations. If you're black, you can have a plane ticket back to Africa or shut up. That's the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, right? Now, I do want to say, since we're going to talk reparations,
they're offensive and racist, really.
Unbelievable. But since we're talking reparations, I don't know if you guys have heard Larry Sharp's plan for reparations. I am calling that the Libertarian Party plan for reparations, and it's the best one that's out there.
I haven't heard.
If you are descendant of American slaves, you get 23 years of, if you own a business and you own 51% of the business, that business pays no taxes for 23 years. That is a huge advantage. And it's not reparations. We're not giving money to anybody, but we are giving people a hand up. Larry talks about the fact, he's like, what we need is generational wealth, right? Generational wealth is a thing that has been denied to people who are descendants of American slaves. This is a good way to get it. And then the other thing he said, now, why do I say 51%? He's like, because my Jewish friends and my Chinese friends, they already know how to run businesses really well. Let them come in and be 49% owners of these businesses. And the people who are getting these reparations get to see how a business is run incredibly effectively. So you do the knowledge transfer as well as building generational wealth. So that's my quick plug for Larry Sharp and what I think is the Libertarian plan for reparations.
Can we get Larry Sharp on our podcast?
I haven't been able to get in touch with Larry Sharp. I've called, I've emailed, I've tweeted. So I'll keep trying unless Dan can wave a magic wand and be like, "Hey, yo,
let me see if I can set that up for you, Corey."
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
The power of networking.
Go ahead.
Exactly.
Josh, you have a question? I see you.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I want to know, in your opinion, what is the best way forward for the liberty movement? Is it fixing the Libertarian Party? If so, how? Is it this liberal party they've got starting up? I mean, what do you think is the best avenue?
Let me tell you what I did. So when I left the Libertarian Party, I went and I became the executive director of People for Liberty. And we worked pretty hard to educate people on liberty issues. But what we found was the country is so divided right now that if you say liberty, that's a politically loaded word. And Democrats are like, oh, you just mean Republicans. And Republicans are like, oh, you just mean smoking dope. And we got, so my thing right now, I run a 501c3 called let.live. And it's our URL as well, let.live. We focus on only 3 things. Now, here's the thing. There's secretly liberty issues. The first thing that we focus on is consent culture, right? And I think we understand the basic idea of it. Nobody should touch you or take anything from you without your explicit consent. And we get the Democrats because they're like, consent culture, that's like believe all women. We're down with consent culture. That's what we want, empower women. I'm like, yes, that is what consent culture means. But sneakily, consent culture also means the government doesn't get the right to take money from out of your taxes because you didn't consent to that. They do not have a preemptive right to your labor. So if we can get everybody to think nobody should touch me or take anything from me without my consent, they're going to get to the logical conclusion, well, then the government shouldn't be taking taxes from me without my consent. And, excuse me, cycle back to what I said about Jefferson, right? Reading that biography, right? The thing that rang out to me in the Declaration of Independence as a government, when instituted among men, derive their just powers from the consent of the government. We are founded on the idea that we are supposed to be a country where people consent, that they agree that we're going to do these things, and nobody can take powers away from you unless you consent. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we do agree to give up some of our power. We agree that the government, you know what? We got to have an armed forces. So there has to be a way to make that happen. Let's figure out what we're going to do. The country's better because we have an armed forces. Maybe we don't want to do, adventure exploring and capturing Greenland, but most of us would say that there's a time and a place for armed forces. So let that live focus on consent culture. We focus on tolerance. Now, when I say tolerance, people are like, well, what does that mean? And when I was campaigning, when I used to live in Massachusetts, when I ran for state auditor, I would talk about tolerance, and I'd say, it's important that we have a tolerant society. And people would say to me in the debate, somebody said, this is Massachusetts. Everybody's tolerant. I'm like, you say that because everybody in Massachusetts supports marriage equality. Everybody supports same-sex marriage. But that's not tolerance because everybody supports it. Tell me what you feel about my Second Amendment rights. That's what tolerance is. Tolerance isn't you agreeing that I get to do the things that I want to do. Tolerance is about you agreeing that I get to do the things that you don't like, but you agree that you don't have the right to stop me from doing it.
Amen.
You have to tolerate that stuff. And if we can teach people that what tolerance is and why it's so important that we tolerate that, why we learn to be tolerant of the stuff that other people do, the stuff that we have to say, I don't have any right to stop you from doing that. Like, I think it's like, you guys might hear me coughing a little bit. My voice sounds differently than it did 8 years ago. That is due to a smoking related illness because I smoked a pack a day from when I was 20 to when I was 33. Here I am at 57, and that's coming back to haunt me now.
Right.
But do I think the government should make cigarettes illegal? I do not. Okay. We can have education. We can talk about it. Certainly the government putting nicotine into cigarette or companies putting nicotine into cigarettes so that you secretly become addicted without knowing, that's bullshit. That shouldn't have happened.
Right.
But the idea that cigarettes, cigars, tobacco should be illegal, come on, that's crazy stuff. We have to tolerate the people do what they want to do. I have friends who have tons of ink, arm, neck, all that stuff. That's not for me. I wouldn't do it. I don't have any right to make that stuff illegal. And I shouldn't judge people because that's a choice they made with their life, right?
Right.
I just got to look at it and say, that person's got tattoos. So what?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's right.
And so that's tolerance. And then the third thing that we focus on, this is the third thing about it. We have to teach people that change is not necessarily a threat. Okay.
Wow.
Political change comes down the road all the time. And I don't want to say old people because I'm old, but old people get threatened sometimes when the world is changing. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I had the argument the other day. I was talking with a person who was older than me. And I'm like, people don't really watch TV anymore. They do their streaming services and stuff like that. And this old person starts arguing with me. He's like, well, that's dangerous. If people aren't watching, NBC or ABC and getting the news from those sources, what's going to happen? That's what's going wrong with the country. I'm like, dude, the world is changing.
No, definitely not that.
Exactly. I'm like, the world is changing. And the fact that the world is changing isn't a threat to you. It just means that the world is changing. Every generation has an iteration of, in my generation, it was those damn kids and their rock and roll. Okay. You guys look like you might be the hip hop generation.
Yep.
I'm sure there's a point in time in which, somebody says that hip hop stuff, it's ruining today's youth.
That was my dad, that hippity hop.
Exactly. That sort of thing. That's where we are. And so my 501c3 now, all we do is focus on these three things. And we never talk about politics, but we talk about the ideas that are under those things that if you get on board with me, saying that nobody gets to touch you or take anything from you without your consent. I don't get to force you to take a vaccine because you didn't consent to do it. I don't get to tell you that you can't smoke an herb because it's just out there. I don't have any right to stop you from doing that. You'd have to consent to something like that. Those sort of things, you get on board with that. You get on board with tolerance, and you get on board with accepting the fact that the world changes, and I don't get to stop people from changing, trying to change their lives for the better. Like those simple things, if we can agree on that. And then a friend of mine has been talking about, he has a campaign where he says, all I want to do is have Americans respect each other. Because if you respect someone, you won't try to tell them what to do. You won't try to make their choices for them. You won't try to limit their lifestyle. If you have enough respect for somebody else, then let them go. Let them live their lives. As long as they're not hurting anybody else, be the best friend you can to them. Give them the best advice that you can. But be ready to, we talked a little bit about scripture. Be ready to, at time, welcome home the wayward prodigal son and say, we are glad that you are back. You went out there and you did those things. You did those things. That doesn't change the fact that we respect you.
Right.
We love you. We want you to have that in our life. And so that basic idea of respect. So in terms of where the liberty movement needs to go, I think we need to come to those ideas that are so fundamentally agreeable to everybody that everybody, whether you're a libertarian, Republican, or Democrat, understands that, yeah, we're in agreement on them. And the libertarians need to learn how to talk to people about that.
Right.
In Boston, every year at the Boston Common, right, famous for the Tea Party, we had a tax day rally, which was actually an anti-tax day rally, where we would come and we would complain about taxes and about the government and everything. And that happened every year in Massachusetts up until 2017, because then Donald Trump was president. And the people who ran it beforehand said, well, we don't need to have a tax day rally anymore. So instead, the Marxists who live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, across the river, said, well, we're going to have a tax day rally and we're going to protest the government. And they invited me to speak. And I'd spoken all the other ones at the Republican. There were some other people who'd been conservative there to speak against that sort of stuff. And they got up there and they gave the same speech that they gave when it was a Republican party. And they just got booed off the stage. I'm like, you guys are idiots. Let's talk about the stuff that appeals to these people, because there are things in the liberty movement that we can agree upon. And so I got up there and I said, here's what I want to talk to you about. Laws require law enforcement, which injects force into our society. If we want to have a more peaceful society, we need to think about, do we have a bunch of stupid laws that causes law enforcement to have to be forceful with us? I started talking about Eric Garner, who was choked to death in New York City for selling loose cigarettes, right? And then Eric, I don't want to say, Eric Garner was a hustler. I don't want to hide that fact about it. Now, he was a man who went out and any way he could make $20, he was going to make $20. And some of it might have been a little bit illegal. Selling loose cigarettes is definitely illegal. Back when this was an issue, a pack of cigarettes in New York City was $12, which is still a crazy amount of money. But he could make $8 by buying a pack, selling them out on the street, one at a time for $1. The police stopped him once and they're like, oh, we don't want you doing that. And he's like, I'm just trying to make a little money here, guys. And what he would do, his pattern was, he would go in, he would buy a pack, he would sell the loosies outside, and then he would come in and he would buy dinner for his kids. Got $8, you can buy ground beef, a little pasta, something like that, take upstairs, make dinner for his kids. First time the cops come by, they're like, look, this is tax revenue money. The government takes that seriously. you start interfering with the tax revenue that we're supposed to be getting, we get mad. Secondly, then they come up with the BS stuff, right? Oh, but you might be selling it to children too. You're not looking to see what people's ages are or anything like that. Blah, blah, blah. The third time they come by, they're like, you are under arrest. He's like, guys, I can't be arrested. I got kids upstairs. And they're like, well, you're under arrest. You're coming downtown. He's like, look, here's the money. Here's the cigarettes, guys. I won't do it again. They're like, well, you're coming with us. He's like, guys, I don't want to go. And the police didn't want to argue with him anymore. So one of them snuck up behind him and they put him into a chokehold. And then he said the phrase that is way too common, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And then he stopped talking and then he was dead. And he was killed because of this stupid law that says you can't resell a cigarette that you bought, right? How can I not sell something that is mine? And
I will say, I will say this about, I lived on Staten Island before I moved to Virginia. And I think that was one of the main, living there and Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, those definitely weren't our neighborhoods. And I know Markel can probably smile when I say this. When I heard about Eric Gardner, I think the first thing I said to myself is that's a side of Staten Island you would have never caught me on. I would have driven through and I would have kept going to the south side of the island where the blacks and Hispanics lived. I think that was my first, introduction to how segregated New York City is, because people have a tendency to live and congregate where their people are. So you got Chinatown, you got parts of Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx where you have all West Indian Americans. My father was from Trinidad. So I definitely, I can relate to what you just said. But me as a New Yorker during that time, you wouldn't have never caught me over there. I would have never been there because I knew that that's not my neighborhood. And I probably would have known that I was going to have some type of interaction with law enforcement.
And you know, I do appreciate that. I think that people should be cognizant of, you get the privilege to do certain things in certain neighborhoods in certain areas based on what's going on.
Right.
Okay. You know, there's a great episode of Family Guy where the world is ending. And Markel, you're laughing. I think you know the episode that I'm going to refer to, where Peter Griffin says he's going to go down to Harlem and say the N-word. That's what I'm going to do, right? And that's something that you know, those people say wouldn't do, because you don't have the right to say that, right? And especially not in Harlem,
right?
Especially not if you're Peter Griffin,
right?
My point though about that story was that talk that I gave them at the end. People are like cheering. They're like, "We love libertarianism. We love the Libertarian Party that's trying to get rid of all these bullshit laws that's getting people killed by police officers."
Right.
Libertarians have the ability to ring that bell with everybody that we talk to, because we've got an agreement where everybody is with us. Right. And you know, this is one of the things that Gary communicated very well. Gary Johnson, when he was running, he said, 80% of you agree with me on 80% of the issues. I'm the only candidate who agrees with you on most stuff. He's like, if you're a Republican, okay, you agree with the Republican candidate, but you don't agree with anything on the Democratic candidate side. Same thing on the other side. It's like, but a libertarian has this broad appeal. And, you know, we might disagree about some things like, you know, back when Gary was running, there was still some question about legalizing cannabis in some states, right? I mean, Virginia didn't legalize until 2020, right?
Yeah.
Maryland, the same. 2016, it was still up in the air. But he said, you know, let's talk about what we want to do about that. Do we want to have this scenario? And one of the most compelling arguments was Gary would say, you know, look, what's killing the most people right now, the most use? When I was a kid, in the paper every day. And I can remember reading the paper, and this is, early on, but my parents were academics. They put things in front of me to read. We got a death list every year, every day, or every week, in the Sunday paper. How many boys from the Houston area, I grew up in Galveston, Texas, died in Vietnam that week?
Oh.
It was always a couple, right? 62,000, I think, fatalities in all of Vietnam during that time. It's a terrible loss. Now, if I tell you that more Americans die from opiate overdose every year than Americans died in Vietnam in all the years of the Vietnam War,
that's crazy.
It is crazy. And you know what is the thing that stops opiate deaths? Legalization of cannabis. Because most of the people who become addicted to opiates, 80% of the people who start on opiates start on somebody else's prescription pain medication.
Wow.
They don't start on heroin. They don't start on opium, anything like that. They start on Percocet or Vicodin, something like that. And I didn't really get that until for the last, 20 years or so, I've heated my house predominantly with wood. I split it, I stack it, all that stuff. And when I lived in Massachusetts, we would get 3 cords delivered. And 3 cords is a lot of wood to stack. And one day I was getting ready to go do it, and I tweaked my back right beforehand. And I had Vicodin that I didn't take when I had my when I had my wisdom teeth come out. I took 2 Vicodin. I was able to work 8 hours, hard labor, no pain at all, no impairment. I wasn't loopy or anything like that. Now, I don't know where y'all live, but around here, if I go down to Home Depot at 6 o'clock in the morning, there are going to be a group of men there looking for day labor. Okay?
Right.
And generally the wage is $100 a day, and they'll do whatever you ask. You feed them lunch, and there's no taxes, there's no forms, anything like that. Now, if you're a person, and we can argue about immigration and all that other stuff, but if you're a person that is your lifestyle and you're making money, let's just say you're working 6 days a week, $600 a week, and you're not taking any taxes out. That's not bad. Yeah, that's a livable wage. You can send some money back home at that rate.
Right.
But the thing is, you're working under the table. And so if you tweak your ankle, that means you don't work that day.
Right.
But somebody says to you, hey, I got a Vicodin right here. I got 2 Vicodin, and only cost you $25. You're able to work, you make $100. That's a clear win.
Right.
What if there's something that's wrong with your ankle? Right? You didn't tweak it. You did something wrong with it. And so then you take Vicodin the next day and the next day, and a week in, you're hooked. That's how a lot of people get hooked on opiates. It has nothing to do with sort of, bad life decision. I mean, it is a bad life decision, and then you can't afford the $25 for Vicodin. So now you're spending the $10 for black tar heroin.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to get into the dangerous shit.
Yeah.
Okay. And the dangerous shit is cheaper than the safer stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're looking at death. And the thing that saved people's lives, and I think this influences a lot of people, is that there is no toxic amount of cannabis, right? I mean, I'm not saying I've explored those things. My appearance here is sponsored today by Wana Sour Gummies.
All right.
But I am and I want to tell people quickly about that. I'm a 5 milligram when I fly. That's about the only time I consume cannabis. But 5 milligrams, I don't mind sitting in the middle seat on a 4-hour flight.
Right.
That's what cannabis is for me.
I got you.
But for other people, they use it for pain, they use it for sleep, whatever. But you can't die from this.
Right.
Okay? Opioids you can die from. And so when we talk about legalizing, and we're talking about saving lives, saving people's lives, we're also talking about law enforcement. We're talking about all the other bad things that come about it. That's something that rings a bell with everybody. Libertarians, if we're going to go anywhere with the party, we have to learn to talk about that stuff. And like Sandy said, talking about open borders, that's a crazy way to talk about it. Now, where am I on the border issue? I'll tell you what I do think. And we just saw this conflict in the administration, right? I'm a software guy. The fact that I can't hire the people that I want to come work in my shop, that's ridiculous. Okay. That is actually socialism 101, right? The definition of socialism is the government controlling the means of production. When
Right.
government uses immigration laws to prevent me from hiring developers from India or China to inflate prices of the people that I want to hire, look, I'm a software engineer. Our salaries are ridiculous, right? 22 years old, you're making over 6 figures a year with a software degree. Okay, and so, and 10 years into the industry, you're getting paid like a Major League Baseball player.
Right.
That's tends to be where people talk. They say, I want to make the league minimum for a Major League Baseball player. Comes to be $267,000 a year. It's ridiculous money. The idea the government tells me that I can't hire somebody to come to the country and write software for me, how is that the government's business?
Now I have one thing, and I know
Yep.
this is gonna electrify Markel. At the end of your bio, it says that you transitioned to the role of Chief Technical Officer at Real Report, and Markel had not yet logged in when you were telling us about that. So Markel, I will tell you, is the affiliate marketing guru. He has taught me a lot about marketing, and when I was in the process of writing the business plan for our transportation company, he was very instrumental in teaching me a little bit about marketing. So I definitely know he would be interested if you would talk about your work at therealreport.com.
Sure. So let me just say that it's Real Report, REEL report, like a film reel.
Okay.
And just very quickly, my background, I was a SPED teacher. That was my first job. I taught special education. I taught autistic students. And then I got into computer science. I didn't realize that teaching autistic students would be such a great background for working with software engineers. But then I didn't realize how much
they just grew up and became software engineers.
Exactly. And I thought it couldn't get any better. And then I found out how much training with autistic students was great for working with libertarians too. But the very first company I worked for was called anyday.com. I don't believe in patents, but if you look at the patent for the online calendar, I'm listed as the inventor on that. Anyday.com invented the online calendar, and then we got bought by a company called Palm. I don't know if you guys remember, Palm was the first
Palm Pilot
device. Yeah, the Palm Pilot, exactly. And I worked for them for a while. Then I did a bunch of other software stuff. I worked for Mass General, which is the great hospital in Boston. I wrote their distance learning program. And then, 2016, I started to get active in politics. In 2018, I became the executive director. So I stepped away from software for a while. And then I came back. I was talking with a friend of mine, and we talked about the fact that one of the things that's separating us so much right now is that we don't know what is real, right? We don't know if our news is real. We don't know if our elections are real. We don't know what's real. So how do we convince people if something is real? So what Real Report does, and you can find it in your favorite app store, in the Apple Store or the Google Store, REEL Report. When you start recording with Real Report, I'm just going to show a little screen on here. So here's the screen. I'm going to start recording a video, and it says, okay, I'm syncing things up. Here's the screen. And now as I start recording the video, you'll see that it says, well, it's recording the GPS data, it's recording the magnometer and the accelerometer while it's recording video at the same time. So I'm going to stop recording this video, and by the time the show is out, this video will be live and everybody will be able to see it. Now that I stopped recording that video, it gets uploaded to the Real Report servers, where an AI machine watches the video and it looks at the movements of the camera. So when I turned it around like this, the camera would have gone from facing north to facing south. The AI watches the video. It says, hey, I saw the camera turn like this. Let me look at the magnometer. Did it say it went from north to south? Let me look at the gyroscope. Did it turn 180 degrees? And by validating all that metadata and the video at the same time, it can say, this is a real video. People who know anything about your phone, you know GPS can be faked pretty easily, right? You can get a fake GPS thing. But if I'm driving down the road and I'm filming a video, my GPS is changing. It doesn't stay constant all the time. So by comparing the deltas, does it look like this person is moving at 50 miles an hour to the northeast? Because that's what the GPS is saying that's happening along the way. By looking at all that data, we can say, do we think this video is real? Do we think it's trustworthy? And so that's the basic idea behind Real Report. Now, there's actually two things about it. So Real Incorporated is the parent company, and Real Report is the first implementation of the technology. But every time that we've pitched, and if anybody's watching this, we are in Series A funding right now. We're trying to raise $5 million by the end of February. So if you want to give me $5 million, Corey will have my information on the screen. You know how to do it. I know Josh is thinking right now, I got $5 million. But every time I pitch this idea, somebody comes up with another way that it makes sense. So one of the craziest things I ever heard was the CEO of the company lives in Israel, and one of his friends is a professional matchmaker. You know, in Israel, it's a religious community. Matchmakers, it's a real thing. So she said, oh my God, I need this, right? Because the most common thing that happens on dating sites is people have old pictures or out of date, or somebody says, yeah, you know, I live in the DC area, but really they live in West Virginia, that sort of thing. And so if you have a Real Report where you just shoot a 10-second video and say, hi, this is me, I'm Dan Fishman, this is my dating profile for eHarmony, and then I upload that, and then you look at it, or maybe a lady looks at it, and she says, oh, look, it's actually Dan. This video is from 1 week ago, so he looks like that. He actually is that fat in real life, but he's not trying to hide it. And he's shooting it in Southern Maryland, so he's in the DC area. That's useful. One of the big problems you probably heard in Florida right now, it's almost impossible to get housing insurance because of the hurricanes, the floods, stuff like that.
Right.
Well, one of the other reasons why is because there's so much fraud in home insurance. If when a big disaster like this happens, and I don't know if you guys know Joe Burns, he's a libertarian, but he's also an emergency. I can't remember the word for it now. Somebody that the insurance company sends out to assess the damage.
Right.
Appraiser.
So he gets paid to drive around the country. He lives in Texas. He has a trailer and a truck, and they say there's been a big disaster in California with wildfires, or in Florida with a hurricane. He drives out there and he inspects the damage, but they can't inspect it all. There's not enough inspectors out there. So you can, if you have a major insurance company, you can send them a picture of your roof, and they'll send you a check for $12,000 right now. But you could also send them a picture of your neighbor's roof, and they'll still send you a check for $12,000.
Right.
But with the Real Report, it says, oh, look, this video was filmed on this day. It was filmed yesterday at 123 Main Street, and you live at 127 Main Street. So I'm sorry, we're not issuing you that check right now.
Wow.
Securitydeposit.com, right? If I'm a landlord, right before I rent out the thing, I walk around and I make a Real Report, and it records the address on it and it records the time. And I say, okay, now when you move into the apartment, you do the same thing. You walk around, you make a Real Report, it stores it in it. When you move out, you walk around, you store a Real Report and say, hey, here's the video I made on the day I moved out. Thing is in perfect shape. Give me back my entire security deposit.
Wow.
Identity as a service. You know, you make a video. My sister has younger kids. They play Minecraft online, and she worries all the time. She's like, are these people they're playing with actual kids, or is this a predator somewhere online?
Right.
If you had an organization where you say, okay, you know what? Have your parents take a video of them with Real Report. Says, you know, this is Gabriel Smith, and he plays Minecraft, and I'm his mom, and we are real people, then that would make my sister happier about saying, okay, my kid can play with this actual verified kid instead of something else. Identity. There's a million things that verified video works for. I'm sure pitching this right now, you guys have probably thought of something. Oh, we could use it for that. I could use it for this. How about, I mean, it's a simple one, right? You're over the road guy. I don't have to tell you, there are some shady ass mechanics out there.
Of course.
People who will take advantage. But if they can show you a video and you say, oh, look, there's a video, and sure enough, you know, there's a crack in my brake line or whatever, that's one thing. But they show you a video and they say, oh, look, that video was taken 30 minutes ago. Right here, you're like, well, maybe that's actually a cracked brake line on my truck. I believe it. Instead of a picture they take me of something that was broken 2 years ago.
Right.
They use that to charge. All these things that verified video makes better. That's what Real Report is all about. And I got into that because, you know, in many ways, it's kind of like libertarianism, right? We advocate for libertarianism. Libertarianism is the only political thing where we're not advocating to try to get something for ourselves, right? We're advocating to make the world better for everybody. We want everybody to have liberty, right?
Yeah.
The fruits of liberty, right? I mean, I talk about the Constitution. Sandy brought it up before. The preamble is such an inspiring thing, right? We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, do ordain and establish this Constitution, right? We're doing it for all of us. Real Report feels like that to me. That if I can make a thing where people like can know and see the truth, I'm making the world a better place. I'm pretty excited about that.
Wow.
I'm also hoping to make a lot of money doing it. But
I understand. I'm not mad at that. Markel, did you have a question?
Man, a question. I am listening. I'm enjoying everything you're saying, and you were heating up. You are on fire.
Thank you, sir.
And I was going to start asking about the tech. For a while, I'm listening to you and I'm loving what you're saying. I'm hearing a lot of myself in what you're saying. And it brings me back to my initial quote is about casting the wide net of skills.
Yep.
And obviously I hear you and I can tell that you have a wide net of skills. And I think about how do you acquire skills? You acquire skills through two various experiences. When we're talking mainly about politics, and I think one of the biggest issues with a lot of politicians is that, or with people with any particular field, is that sometimes you get one-dimensional, you get so tunnel vision that you're a politician, that's all you know, that's all you've ever known, that's all you've ever seen, so that's all your vision is able to cast a wide eye to. But if you have various skills and talents and experiences, like someone being in politics and knowing about tech, then you have other experiences to pull from. You know how a app works when it works properly. You know about glitches and stuff when something's not programmed right. And one of my favorite sayings is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And being able to be successful and transfer that from one thing to another is being able to replicate the successes in the system from one thing to another. And I love everything you're saying. And right, just like from the start, when Corey said, when I hear that you're a tech guy, it's just going to spark something in me. And yeah, it's because I know tech guys are different type of thinkers. Tech guys or people that are multifaceted with their skills. Someone that can actually speak and be technical, that's kind of rare, because you hear of technical people, hey, if I'm an IT guy, I'm in the back office, I just work on computers, they don't want to talk to people, don't talk to me, just send me the reports and stuff like that. But being able to merge that, when they put people like us in rooms and have us speak, it's like people's eyes light up, because they're like, we've never heard those type of perspectives.
Yeah.
It's a whole new vision. And I'm part of a mastermind that's basically based off of online marketing. And I'm around people that are in it for a specific reason. They want to make money from home, but they aren't necessarily technical people. A lot of people that they're not great on the computers, but they've entered a field where they have to learn about computers.
Right.
Or they want to make money from home, but they've never had a traditional brick and mortar business. I've had a brick and mortar business. So the perspective and the mindset is different. And being able to use those skills and translate it is something of a, in my opinion, it's like a superhero power. Just to think about it, like you can go into a room and it's not about a person's financial acumen, how much money they have, but it's the knowledge that you have and the skills and the experiences that you can turn a room on its head.
I agree with that.
Just with that.
I was going to say, I agree with that 100%. And I think one of the components there, and one of the things that libertarians have, is that because we want to be free, and because being free means you're not dependent on anybody, you learn how to do things for yourself.
Yeah.
And, you know, anybody who's owned their own business knows that when something has to get done, if you're the person who owns the business, you got to find a way to get it done.
Right.
Anybody who owns a house, that sort of thing, you're like, the heat's not on, my old lady's going to kill me. I got to get that fixed right now, or whatever it is. Like when we bought our first house, okay, we didn't have a lot of money, and it was a real fixer-upper. And very quickly, there was plumbing that needed to be done. I'm like, well, Home Depot's got a book. It has a lot of pictures in it. Here's a map cylinder, right? I can learn how to sweat a pipe. I can cut copper. And before I knew it, I'm doing simple plumbing. Now, for those of you out there, don't get into the complicated plumbing. Call the plumber before that stuff. Like, you can do some simple things, but you can get into a lot of trouble thinking you can do more than you can. But that's also part of that self-reliance, is knowing what you can do and what you can't. And you don't know that limit until you
try.
made that mistake once.
Amen.
Exactly.
Yes,
That's
sir.
exactly it.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, if I have a question for you, I don't even know if I have a real question. I always ask people, what is the origination point of where they started? And I remember in the beginning of your story, you said when you were around 9, you heard the speech and it enlightened you.
Yeah.
And just to be able to think that, of course, that was just 20 years ago at the max. But just to think that a person could think that far back and remember those type of experiences and have that be a trigger, that right there is something too. So I love to hear people's stories about how they get started, because it's always some hints. It's like something from the beginning that sparks in the person that you say, okay, I can see where they're going. I can see where they might end up. And it's always those little keys to success. Do I have a question for you? I would love to be able to spend some time with you talking more about the tech. I know we don't have all night, but just like you said, you could talk about this stuff when you started talking about the tech and ideas of, how you use the skills and the knowledge and the ability to manipulate things and put them together. That right there is very exciting to me. I already pulled up on the Google Play Store the app, because as you were speaking, you're right. It's a lot of ideas that come to mind. And I think in this specific field, it allows you to be so creative and think. And then to be able to bring that to politics, I think politicians are some of the least creative people there is, because they just read from a playbook that's been written, and it's like they're just following the script.
And there's so many politicians have never actually done anything.
Right.
And the thing that people will always remember about you and know about you, and we talk about this, I like to say there's maybe 100 doers in the libertarian movement, people who can actually do a thing. And then there's a lot of talkers, okay? And they can't do that stuff. If you know how to do something, and it doesn't have to be in politics, it can be in your job, it can be in your house, anything like that. that says more about you and about your character than anything else we can ever talk about. You know, I had the tremendous privilege of coming from a stable home where my dad was a scientist. You know, he wasn't a millionaire at all, but he made a good living. But we grew up thinking we were poor. Okay. You clean your plate. You don't ask for new shoes, right? You earn new shoes, stuff like that. And we were taught at an early age, you do things. You don't ask for things. You learn how to do things. And once you learn how to do anything, that's the skill that you were talking about. You're saying it applies to everything. Once you learn that you can do something, then you start thinking, if I can do something, I can do anything. And that's the skill that libertarians need to convey to everybody else, that not only if you can do something, you can do anything. It's never too late to become a person who can do something with their life.
Wow.
Who can do something. You know, Gary Johnson, like another thing that he used to say all the time when he was on the campaign was he would say, if whatever you do, find a way to do it entrepreneurially, right? Find a way to do the thing that you do and figure out how you can do it and get paid for yourself instead of doing it working for somebody else. If you're going to work for somebody else, I mean,
that makes sense.
That it is what it is. But so I don't know if you guys have watched old Chris Rock stand-up routine, Bigger and Blacker. And there's a part in it where he talks about getting paid for what you know how to do and how critical that is. And a lot of people don't think that they can do that. They don't think that they can do something and get paid for it. We empower everybody. You know, one of my campaign slogans used to be empower people by depowering government.
Wow.
Empower people, right? To think that they can do for themselves. They'll stop being so reliant on the government. And this is where it gets evil, right? Government doesn't want us to do that. Government doesn't want us to think that we can take care of each other. And they don't want us to think that we can take care of ourselves. They want us to believe you need the government.
The government. Amen.
Right. And this is, you know, the Harry Brown quote, only government breaks your legs and then says, now thank me for the crutches that I gave you. Right?
Jeff says that all the time.
Yep. And that's where we have to be. And so to circle back around to what you were saying, Corey, how do we figure this out? How do we survive? How does the liberty movement survive this really terrible break that happened? There's two things about it. First, we have to recognize that what we're just talking about, knowing how to do things and knowing how to get paid, there are people who take shortcuts. Okay. And the fact is that when you're in politics, because there's power, there's a lot of shortcuts to getting paid. I have two friends, right? I was executive director of the Libertarian Party. I have, you know, a lot of people on my Facebook list that I wouldn't say are friends, but I felt like I should accept their friend request. But I have two people that I know who in 2020, they were political operatives, right? They knew how to form a PAC. They knew how to raise money, and they put together Stop the Steal PACs. They said, you know what? That's the big thing. We're going to go out and we're going to raise money to investigate the elections that they secretly knew weren't actually stolen. But they raised $2 million to investigate this. They turned in the reports from, you know, the Secretary of States and all this stuff. They didn't do any research really themselves, but they got paid. Now, I don't mind people having a hustle for themselves, but make it an ethical hustle, right?
Right.
Don't take people's money and not do something. If you
it's not,
I love this shirt, Markel. I love this the hat rather. I love that hat.
I'm saying if it's ethical, to me, it's not really a hustle. Hustle is, I don't know. Hustle is the energy that you put behind it. Like, right. I know I know Josh is a policy person. I know that the Libertarian Party sorely needs somebody like him because he has the policy know-how. He understands how things work. I know Sandy is an attorney. If I call him up with a legal problem, it may not be the answer that I want, but I know that he's going to provide me the best legal argument or perspective that I need to come from. The same with Markel. When I was writing my business plan and I was struggling with the marketing part, he would, send me some videos or I would do research. And every book I looked at, I always went back to my wife and I was like, Markel said the same exact thing. So Markel brings his strength, Josh brings his strength, Sandy brings the strength, and I have the strength, but it's not a hustle really. It's the hustle is what we put into it, but we're not trying to like unethically take your money from you. We're trying to basically, like Markel says, it's always something that's value added. And
right.
I think that, that's where I'm torn. I just wrote this down while you were talking, Dan. Every time I say I want to leave the Libertarian Party, I read Wes Benedict's book.
Yeah.
And it's always somebody like Wes or Sandy or even Josh that kind of gives me a compelling argument to stay. But I just kind of feel like, you can't fault the people from the classical liberal party because they're like, we know we could, build a better mousetrap. So we're going off in our direction because we wholeheartedly believe that we can make a better stab at it than staying here and repairing what they feel has been destroyed.
Well, and I mean, here's the thing, right? I mean, now everybody knows there was significant fraud going on at the Libertarian Party, right? And the chair is being investigated for paying her baby daddy for $120,000 for not doing anything. How do you try to get somebody to give you money when the organization was giving away money to just nepotism, right? To people who weren't doing anything?
Yeah.
And now it's even bigger than that. Right now they're looking at the joint fundraising committee, and there may be $700,000 that went into somebody's personal pocket.
Are there going to be criminal indictments over that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's the thing. It's a really interesting thing. I hope that there will be, Sandy. There is an interesting question of standing, which you can talk about, right? Somebody in the joint who gave money to the joint fundraising committee is going to have to file a legal complaint and say, I feel like I was defrauded. And then once that happens, how does it get prosecuted? Now, I'm not a lawyer. You need the state to bring those charges. And
the state or the federal government, there could be some kind of mail fraud, wire fraud, RICO.
Yep. RICO, I actually think there's a very strong RICO thing because they're
right, and a nonprofit has to follow certain rules and has to say things in a certain way, and that raises questions of 18 USC 1001, which is signing a false form. For any kind of a federal thing. But and I guess the scandal can be cleaned up. Now, you raised the question about fundraising, and I hope I haven't butted in where I didn't belong. But I've always been concerned about Libertarian Party because, and I may be looking at it from the outside in, and there may be people who are really, really doing something, but there may not be enough people really, really doing something. But it seems like I hear an awful lot about, I gave $25 to somebody, rah, rah for me. And I'm thinking, and of course my thinking is certainly colored by the church, because the church people church people have a rule. It came from the Old Testament. New Testament probably likes it too, about tithing.
Yeah, 10%.
About sacrificial giving.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, if you remember the Libertarian Party, maybe that's where you have to be. You have to almost have like a political tithe, if you'll forgive me for saying it like that.
No, I think it's fair.
And here's the thing. You know who would really benefit from a political tithe? Virginia and New Jersey. Because why? Because we have those weird election times.
Cycle.
Libertarians could give thousands of dollars to Corey Fauconier for his special election and maybe has a shot at winning.
Yep.
Because who votes in those elections? But
well, you're exactly right, Sandy. And I'll give you an example of how that happened. When I was executive director, the Libertarian Party ran a thing called the Frontier Project. And masterminded by Apollo Pizzell, but it happened in Wyoming for a very specific reason. Wyoming has no campaign finance laws. You can give as much money as you want to a candidate, but it's also a very small state. And so looking at the state rep races, we said, we think there's a saturation point in terms of what you could spend, and it's pretty low. If you bought like $50,000 in advertising, that would be as much as any candidate was going to spend. You would look like a real candidate. And it happened.
Right.
We got a Libertarian elected to the state house in Wyoming. Sid Dowd.
More than one time. Bert was elected.
Yep. And it proved that you're right, if we identify the correct races, we can get candidates elected. Go ahead.
Yes. Now, let me add something for a strategy situation, and that is if you had the right candidate for president, you could do something where you could indicate to all of the Libertarian faithful, look, we're going to be on the ballot in all 50 states, but we're not going to actively campaign in all 50 states. We're going to run ads in certain states where we have there are some states like New York where there's a 0 chance. I mean, really 0.
Yeah,
of
California, Massachusetts, Texas, same thing.
Right. But there are states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, New Mexico, where a Libertarian could get 10%.
Yep.
And 10% is almost the threshold to go further and higher than 10%. You concentrate your effort in those states to run the ads in those states, and what you want to do is your Libertarian candidate for president gets enough electoral votes. Is it a long shot? Yes. Yep. But it's the best long shot we have. Yep. If you can get enough electoral votes, you can gum up the election, put it in the House of Representatives.
Yep.
Then the Libertarian candidate can say to the people, look, tell the Democrats and the Republicans to come up with a consensus candidate. And since the Constitution only permits 3 candidates to appear before the House, which would be the Democrat, the Republican, and the Libertarian has at least a shot at winning. Because I could see the New York Times or somebody saying, give the Libertarian a try. Let's see what happens. So that
actually was Gary's campaign. So Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, they identified 10 states, but then they narrowed down to 6 and said in these 6 states, one of them was New Mexico because Gary had been governor there, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wyoming, North and South Dakota. And they said, we're going to do everything that we can in those. Now, this last cycle, Lars Mapstead said, I want to do even better than that. I'm going to focus just on Maine CD2. So Maine Congressional District 2 is in the north, maybe CD1, is the northern part of the state.
The one that voted for Trump 3 times, I think.
Exactly. But they also have elected an independent governor and an independent senator from there.
Sure.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. And so, Lars, for people who don't know, Lars is a guy who comes in with an enormous an enormous capacity to spend on the campaign.
I think he's got a fair amount of money.
Yeah, he's got a lot of money. He invented a site called Adult Friend Finder, which people might know. It's essentially it was Tinder before Tinder.
Okay.
And it generated a tremendous amount of money. And since then, he's been an even bigger web entrepreneur. The first time I met him, he showed up in his $500,000 Porsche. And I'm like, wow, that's an amazing car. He's like, well, I got so many cars in the garage. I try to drive different car every day. I'm like, wow. So he didn't win the nomination. That's what happened. But that idea, I think, at the presidential level is a pretty good one. I do have an interesting thought. I'm going to run it past you guys first. All right, I'm not running for president this cycle. So let's just say Real Report sells.
They probably wouldn't let me run for president. It'd be fun, but I probably wouldn't make it. Can I add one more thing before?
Please do, Sandy.
Yeah, somebody put up on X today. What's the future of the Libertarian Party? And I wrote down my elaborate little thing. It took 4 screens from X about run for president and that kind of thing. But a lot of people were saying what Corey Fauconier has been saying: run for school board, run for local office, get involved at the local level, and be kind of the Javier Milei of your city or county. Yeah, and say, Afuera, to useless programs that spend a lot of money and stuff like that. And you can obtain a record of accomplishment at a local level that might give you a realistic shot at a higher level, such as state delegate, state senator, statewide office, whatever.
Right.
And I think that's important because that might be the libertarian that most people see is the libertarian that gets involved and runs for city council or school board, and then is the one that stands up and says, you're spending too much money, you're wasting, here's how you're wasting, you got too many programs, you got too much administration. If you cut that down, you can give more money to the teachers and still not spend the same and not ask for more money. That kind of thing. And that would be powerful.
The other benefit is that those races are generally nonpartisan. So you don't have the libertarian anchor around your neck when you're running.
And a fair number of races, sometimes somebody runs and there's no opponent.
Yep. So
it's just the incumbent running against nobody. In Hanover, we had 5 countywide races like that. I wrote in people from around that I knew. My wife got a vote for treasurer, and I did that as a protest against.
So there are. I'll tell you two stories around that. First, the libertarian who's been in office for the longest is a woman named Carla Schultz, who's been on the city council in Burnsville, which is a subdivision of Minneapolis. And she's been in office for 8 years, and she ran the local training. When I was executive director, we paid to send her around the country to train people how to run for city council, school board, all of those things. Yep. One of the things that, people complain about, Mises killed that program, right? Because they didn't agree with Carla because of where she was on some issues. And so they killed the candidate training program. Now they say, we're trying to do this thing, decentralized revolution. They had this amazing plan where we had, over 1,000 people attend Carla's classes in 1 year. And we killed that. We killed that because of just stupid internal politics. Now, the thing about finding the unopposed races, so the best example of that, I'm going to call out Chuck Moulton, Dr. Moulton. Guy is both a PhD and a lawyer, really just smart guy. He noticed a thing in Pennsylvania where, because libertarians were a minor party, they had a later date to turn in their nomination papers for elections.
Right.
And one year he noticed that there were about 100 elections that nobody ran in.
Wow.
And what happened if nobody ran, then after the election was over, the winning party would appoint somebody to that seat. So in 2020, the Pennsylvania Libertarian Party instituted what they called the Moulton Maneuver, where they identified 114 races where nobody was running, and they spent the money, and they got a Libertarian on the ballot, and they elected 114 Libertarians. It's the all-time record.
Amazing.
And it was done really well. And what's interesting about it is they elected Libertarians to some really important positions. County auditor. They were able to make a Libertarian Association of Auditors, because if Libertarians are looking at all the spending, that's a really great place for us to be. Work really well. That sort of stuff.
You can say Alfreda pretty well when you're the county auditor.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You just say, look, I'm not saying that this is good or bad.
Expense accounts and see what they're doing for expenses.
Exactly. Because we know that government, a lot of what government does is sort of kickback. And
I think we've, Corey, I think we ought to take this podcast and split it into two. Fishman Part 1, Fishman Part 2. I don't know how many people will do 2 hours.
Markel can do that, and I'm going to do this. Dan, we appreciate you coming. I know we're probably going to have to invite you on again, and I know I have taken a lot of notes, so I'm sure I'm going to follow up with an email. Markel, did you have anything in closing that you wanted to shout before we go?
No, we're gonna have to save this for part 2. We're gonna have to save it for part 2, because we definitely got to have a part 2, because I know there's still a lot more information that he has to share, and getting into the tech deeper and stuff like that. So we want to do a part 2 for sure. So
that's fine. So what we'll do, Dan, is we'll split this into 2. And then we'll invite you on. You check your calendar, and you can come back on. If you can go ahead and give everybody that's listening and watching, Dan, your contact information, and we will go through the edit process. Markel will splash that under your name. So go ahead with your contact information.
Very honored.
Well, let me say, what a privilege it has been to be on Talk Over Drinks, Corey. I'm very flattered that you would ask me on, and I'm happy to be here speaking with you guys, speaking to your audience. People want to reach out to me. The best way is on social media. I am at Fishdan on X/Twitter. You can find me, Dan Fishman, on Facebook. You can find my personal blog is at fishdan.com. I am old enough that I am Fishdan on every possible media thing that you can think of.
I got you.
So easy to find me in those places. Real Report is my thing right now, professionally, and then Let.Live is my 501c3. We published some pretty good articles there. We had a great article last week about the U.S. push towards digital currency, U.S. digital currency, which I think is a terrible threat to most Americans. If there's a U.S. digital currency, the only way you can get paid is if the Treasury gives you permission to get paid. That's a bad idea. So I would love to come back and do a longer show. Corey, we got to have you on Political Deep Dive at some point too.
Anytime you shoot me some dates, I'll let you know. I know the next time we'll be home in Virginia is the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th of February. So if you want to, reach out to me and let me know, I would definitely rather be on while I'm stationary and not moving down the highway. But yeah, man, Dan Fishman, we appreciate your time and your information, and we'll definitely be in touch so we can cross-pollinate. Again, folks, my name is Corey Fauconier, the God, my partner in justice, the God Markel Prines, and everybody's favorite Nazarene attorney, Sandy Sanders. Jeff Kleb cannot be with us this evening, but he's here in spirit. And I know Joshua Huffman had to log off. We are Talks Over Drinks, folks. Remember, it's never too early or too late for Talks Over Drinks. Cheers.
All right, let's talk over drink. Talks over drinks.